Hi there, Bani here. So in our previous sessions, we've looked at how we can install Microsoft Power Automate on our PC. We've looked at how we can create a new flow. Let's create a flow to interact with a web page such that we'll fill a form on the web page. To do that, you click New Flow. Let's name it Task 1 underscore version 1. I will enable the Power FX. You have the option not to enable it anyway, but then I prefer to use that. One other thing that you need to note is that the way you create the flow is somehow affected if you use the Power FX language. If you choose not to use the Power FX language, it also affects the way you use the flow, not in the negative sense anyway, but then it will determine, let's say it will determine how your flows will be created, because then that language is in the Power FX. Okay, so let's click to create it. Once your flow designer window is opened, now we get to create the flow itself. The flow that we intend to create is we want to, let's do task 1. This is the form that we intend to automate. We want to fill in the name. We want to be able to click on these radio buttons here. We want to be able to come and then select an option from this drop down. We want to be able to select this checkbox here. We want to be able to upload a file. In this case, it's a passport photo, and then click on submit to submit. Then possibly we'll look at how we can also grab data from the web page and then send it onto our PC as a CSV file or a text file. Okay. Alright, so I'm going to fix this here just so we get space to work with. Yeah, I think that's better. Okay, so let's look at how we can fill data into an input like this. The first thing that you need to do when you want to work with a web page is to get the page URL. Okay, that's the address. In this case, I'm going to create that as a variable. So I go to the variables action and then I select set variable. You'll be presented with a dialog window where you need to put in the variable. In this case, the page URL. So I'll go and select that from the page and then I'll paste it in here. So this is the page URL. Then you have the option to name your variable. So for instance, I will call this page URL. So that is the variable. Note that you also have the option to come here to the variables area and then click on this, and then once you've clicked on that plus icon, you can click on input. You can also give it a name. Let me just say PURL. It's a text variable. Remember, you have the option to select the data type for your variable over here. Then you put your value, in this case the page URL, and then you can also give it the name. This is an external name. I can also call it again page. Let me just do, just so we can have differences, let me just do pg URL. You can give it a description. If it's a sensitive data, you mark it as sensitive or you mark as optional, and you can save it, and then you have an input variable with the name that you give to it. Okay, so you have these options just to show you, and all these can be used during your flow. All right, so whichever you choose to use is up to you. You can come and create it as an input variable here, or you can set a variable using the actions. Once you have the variable created, in our case we are using Microsoft Edge, so we are going to launch the Microsoft Edge application. Of course, we already have it opened, and so what we'll do is we'll come here and just type launch, and then you will be given these options. You have the option to launch Excel, browser, access Outlook, but then we are working with a browser, we are doing a browser automation, and so we have options to use Internet Explorer, Firefox, Google Chrome, or in our case we are using Microsoft Edge. And so I'll select Microsoft Edge and then drag it over. Once we drag it to the design area, we are presented with a dialog window that asks us to launch it as a new instance. So it means that in that case, if we did not have this Edge window already opened, it will open it, or even if we have it opened and then we like to open in a different window, this is what we use the launch new instance for. In our case, we were attached to a running instance, telling it that we already have the page opened and ready to use. You just attach the actions to it. The match mode here is mixed. You have the option to do an exact, a partial, or use even regex in here. Then we are attaching to it by title. You have the option to attach to it by URL, or use the foreground window if you have it opened already. In our case, I will do by URL, and then the URL will be the variable that we use. Of course, we could have just come in here and then pasted the URL directly like this, but if you are working with variables, you could choose to click on this variable icon that pops up when you click in there, or you have the option to use the PowerFX language, which we took earlier. So you see we have the input variable where we have the variable that we created. Then we also have the flow variable that we created. So in our case, let me just use the flow variable that we created. You can choose this or that, they will all work. So take notice of how the PowerFX language presents the variables that you put in there. So equal to, then page URL. Okay, then the target is our local computer. Then we are running this action by browser extension. If you are using a web driver, that one you select that, but in our case we are using browser extension. Then you have an advanced tab where you can specify the time to wait or timeout. In the default that we have here is 5. Okay, now note that if we were not using the PowerFX language, there will be no need for the equal sign, but if you are using the PowerFX language, you need to put the equal sign there. And the variable that this particular action we are running will produce is the browser variable. We can choose to name it, we can choose not to have the variable produced. In our case, we need it produced, so we'll leave it like that, then click on save. So then once that is done, we get this automation flow with these two actions: create a variable, and then we launch an instance with the variable that we've created. Okay, and the variable holds the page URL. So let's test it out. Before we test it out, let's put a stop flow action down here, so that when it runs, we know that definitely we stop it here. Okay, all right. So let's test our flow. We do that by clicking on the run button up here. So let's test it out. Alright, so we are being told that it failed to assume control of the Microsoft Edge. Alright, so if you get an error like this, what you have to do, since it's a new installation you did and you're starting up, is you go to the settings of your Microsoft Edge application, look for extensions, and go to manage extensions. Once you are there, look for the Microsoft Power Automate extension, and you would realize that it may be toggled off. I want you to toggle that on. Then you turn on the extension. Once you've turned that on, let's come back and try that again, and it works. Good. So if you happen to get that problem, that is how you fix it. Okay, now that we are able to launch to the page that we want, let's now look at how we can fill some information into the text field here. So to do that, you would need to go to your UI elements button at the right, go to add UI element, and once you do that, you will get a new interface shown to you, a UI element picker. With the UI element picker, it shows you how you're going to actually pick the element. It says you position your mouse on your UI element that you want to pick, and then you hold down the control key and then you do a left click. So in our case, I'm going to attempt to grab all the elements that we'll need by holding down the control and then clicking, or you can right click on it. You'll be presented with a menu, then you capture the UI element. You also have the option to inspect the UI element, but we'll leave that for another time. So we'll capture this UI element. It gets populated within this window, indicating that it has been successfully captured. Then we'll also come here for our radio buttons. We'll capture that this way. Let's capture our drop down as well, and that of our checkbox. Then we have the file picker for our photo, then of course our submit button. So essentially we've grabbed the elements that we will need for our automation flow. Once you are sure you have all your elements, you click on done. Note that you could always come back and then pick some more. Okay, once you have the element captured, they will appear at the UI element section at the right. Now you get to your automation flow and you have the option to rename the various UI elements that you've captured, which I will advise you do. So for instance, I will rename this, let's just say txt name. I'll name this rd male, rd female. This is our drop down. Let's just call this location. With the checkbox, let's do check accommodation. Let's call this file photo. Let's call this btn. Submit. So you have the option to call it anything that you like. Okay, you could even rename this here, my web page. You can rename it. Alright, so you have all these UI elements ready to use within the flow. Once these are ready, what we will do is we'll come back to our actions page, and then we will start automating how to input something in here. All right, so to do that, we have different options. Okay, we have different ways we can input text in there, but then let's try this out. We are going to populate this text field. Okay, note that we have UI automation and then browser automation. In our case, we are using the browser automation option. You could also use this, but then with a web automation, this is the best. If you were automating any other form that is natively on your PC, then you would have to use the UI automation option. But in our case, we are doing a browser automation. So we'll pick this and then drag it here. The web browser instance is browser, which is the variable that we created as a result of launching to the page. Now, on the browser page, which element do you intend to make the input for? And in our case, you can just come in here. When we click, we get this drop down where it presents us with all the UI elements that we've captured. And remember, we named that txt name. So select that and then get populated in here. Once that is done, you have the text area where you have the option to provide the specific value you need to fill in the text area. So in our case, let's give any name. Let's do Patrick by me. Once that is done, you come here. Let's test that out to see if it works. All right, so you see that it has successfully filled in the name that we provided. Okay, so I think that part is successful.